Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. So this is a 1-hour live webinar on EDI. The topic is Tough Conversations, Addressing EDI Without Escalation or Silence. And the speaker is Dr. Janelle Abela of Diverse Solutions Strategy Firm. And my name is Nick Tenev of Camel Litigation. I'll be your host and moderator. So let's get started. A bit more about this presentation or this webinar. As I mentioned, it's 1 hour of EDI and it's accredited by the Law Society. It's organized by Camel Litigation, my law firm. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the Q&A box in Zoom. There's also a comment box, but that's more for general comments and technical issues. So please put all the questions in the Q&A box. Also, you're welcome to type them at any time, but we will reserve those for the end of the webinar. So all the questions will be answered at the end. A bit about me. As mentioned, my law firm is Camel Litigation. I am a lawyer and I'm the principal of the firm. I started my legal career on Bay Street. I have an engineering background and I have been operating Camel Litigation since 2019, and I am a 2016 year of call. We are a boutique litigation firm with offices in Toronto and Vaughan. We serve Toronto, the GTA, and rest of Ontario. We have 2 lawyers and 3 support staff. And our roots go back all the way to 1903. Here's a little letter from back in the day. And we practice in the areas of real estate litigation, commercial litigation, and estates litigation. And our cases have been featured in respected publications such as the Toronto Star, Thomson Reuters, and Mondac. And now for the agenda for today's webinar. So first is the introduction, which I just did. Next, we'll have the presentation by Dr. Janelle Abela, which will last around 45 minutes. We'll have an outro thereafter, some final words, and then we'll have the Q&A session for 5-10 minutes. So the whole webinar should be around an hour. Okay, so I'll hand it off to Dr. Janelle Abela. And I'll stop sharing here.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you everyone for taking the time to join today. I appreciate the opportunity to learn with you and to share my insights on EDI, and grateful that you're taking your 1-hour EDI accreditation with me today. So we're talking about having tough conversations and really looking at how to integrate EDI into our spaces without escalation or silence, because there's a really polarizing effect on our spaces right now where we're either not having the conversation at all out of fear, or we're escalating the conversation because anything to do with EDI often ties to politics and ties deeply to culture, and it affects the way that we engage with each other. So my goal for you today, as you go through this session and as you start to think about questions that you might have, is how are you having these conversations in an effective way? So to start, I want to get us all on the even playing field to decide what is a tough conversation. And it's not what you think, because tough conversations traditionally in your spaces as lawyers is going to be very different than a socially difficult conversation tied to EDI. So my definition of a tough conversation for this conversation is dialogue that's tied to EDI work. So equity, diversity, and inclusion. There's a lot of different acronyms that connect to equity, diversity, and inclusion that you might have heard of. You might have heard of DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. You might hear about marginalized populations or inclusiveness or belonging, respect in the workplace. There's a lot of those terms, and those all are under the umbrella of this conversation. So we're looking at conversations that could lead to harm, risk, or misalignment between the people having that conversation. And that could be between you and colleagues. It could also be between you and clients. To give you a bit of background on my research aligns with the legal field through policing. I did my PhD research understanding the barriers to EDI for police officers in Canada, which was supported by my committee, which was made up of lawyers who also investigated and wanted to understand educational sites. Where are you learning to have conversations about EDI? What precedent is being set in the court system or the justice system or in public or with your clientele? How are you being taught what EDI is, how to apply it? And so that's the lens I'm bringing in today is how are you expected to have these conversations versus how you could have these conversations. In a tough conversation, there's a few qualities that are important to consider. First, stakes feel really, really high. EDI is about people. And when we talk about people, it becomes very personal. So the way that we have the conversation, we feel a lot more ownership over it. And so do the people that we're engaging with. They feel like they're invested in the conversation because it's their well being, their psychological safety, and the outcomes directly affect them. So when we talk about the outcome, we're looking at people's credibility, we're looking at advancement, trust, relationships, all of those pieces that fit into who we are as individuals. There's also a lot of different power dynamics present. And those power dynamics are workplace present, and then they're also socially present. And the difference between those is in your workplace, you have your seniority, you have your different roles. You may have more influence than others. You may have been there for a lot longer. You may come from a space that has more influence. That affects how you engage with each other. We also have social dynamics that affect how we engage with each other. And that refers to our race, our ethnicity, our gender, our sex, our religion, and how those power dynamics can also influence the way that we see each other. Third, there's the avoidance. Avoidance is safe because why would I want to feel discomfort? Why would I want to be uncomfortable in a conversation? We are in a time in our society where we're pushing people to put themselves first. And putting ourselves first sometimes means we create boundaries that can harm others. And we may not want to have a conversation, or we may not feel like it's important to have a conversation because that conversation feels damaging or risky to us. Really, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have a conversation that is open for all people involved so that we can really move forward together. So, why are we having these conversations? And this is the critical buy in that I want you to have as you go forward in this work, but also as you have this discussion with other people, because you need to encourage tough conversations with the people around you. That moves us forward. And the clear answer here is that without having these discussions, we're not going to solve the issues. There's a lot of risk tied to not having tough conversations. In a legal environment, that is related to setting precedent, it's related to your reputation. It could affect the way that your firm looks to other people, the success you have in the justice system, or it can have effects on your team. Because what you're going to learn as we go through is that there's a lot of effects on the individual that cause people to mentally pull out of an organization. That affects your innovation. That affects your bandwidth. It increases risk. It increases errors. And those errors become harmful to the opportunities that your organization has. We also have a lot of risk in terms of our talent. How are you going to bring people in? How are you going to encourage people to trust you, work with you, believe in you, if you can't have the conversations about those difficult pieces? When we move to an EDI lens and we talk about having the mindset of equity work, inclusive work, and we recognize diversity, we're making sure that the decisions we make reflect the comprehensive problem. We make sure that our risk management is reflective of the entire situation. And we make sure that as leaders, we're understanding all of the dynamics at a micro and macro level to ensure the work that we're doing is sustainable. Yes, you may have gotten away with doing things a certain way at one point in time. You may have been able to achieve a goal without having a tough conversation. Maybe you didn't have that tough conversation and people stayed. But our generations are shifting and the people are shifting and the demands are shifting. And so you may not have seen these effects yet, but these effects are coming, if not already existing, and you haven't been able to put a pulse on that signal yet. What do tough conversations protect? here's the real effects that you're going to see in your day to day. First, professional integrity. We're seeing an increase in call outs for poor response to EDI in every industry. We're seeing the publication of documents go online, and then you have people who are professionally equipped to analyze them, also with people who are not professionally equipped to analyze them, analyzing them and then putting their feedback online and then putting additional narratives in space that anyone can engage with. And that is a risk, not just for your integrity, but for your reputation. We talk about client outcomes when we're talking about the diversification of populations. Whatever field of law you're in, your clientele is diversifying. Our populations are diversifying. Our complex social issues are diversifying. And all of the attributes that come with that are going to change the way that we support clients in our spaces. So the judgment that you have to make sure that it's equitable, to know if what you're doing is inclusive, the supports you put in, not only does that build client retention, but it also supports the outcome and sets precedent for sustainable outcomes in the future. And third, you talk about firm culture and retention. Labor market is critically challenging right now. We're so competitive because there's labor shortages, there's remote work. You could be working for anyone in the country, anyone outside of the country, anyone in the world right now from your home. So creating a culture and a space that people want to come into and want to be involved in is very important. So we're talking about attrition that's addressed through EDI. How do you include people? How do you understand if they feel included? What is the feedback that you're receiving to ensure that what they're doing and what they're receiving is sustainable? So why are we having this conversation? Because this is your key to innovation. It's your key to maintaining the success you have and the key to unlocking new potential internally for your colleagues, but also externally for clientele. So let's talk about this in real life. The base level knowledge of EDI is really important to have because I think most of the conversations around equity, diversity, and inclusion become too complicated and too complex because we don't really understand the definition. I want to give you the definition because the definition is really going to allow you to integrate it into everything you do. So, equity is fairness based on need. That's the outcome or the goal of our action. Diversity is who's present, it's what we're talking about. And your inclusion is who feels valued and heard and how we respond. So, the example here in the graphics is someone who's vegan. If someone in your workplace is vegan and you're hosting a staff lunch and you don't include a vegan option, then you're not being inclusive. So, their diversity is the difference of what they eat. The inclusion is being able to provide them a dietary option. And equity, which is our goal, is them being able to have lunch with the rest of the staff. So if you're doing it as an appreciation measure, it allows people to be recognized and sitting with everyone else. And quite literally, that's the idea of having everyone at the table. More complexly, these conversations, the diversity is what people need to survive. Like we're individuals, we all have an intersectionality, which is who we are on that micro level. So if I'm a woman of color, I'm a woman of color living in Ontario, I'm a woman of color living in Ontario with neurodiversity. It keeps layering. And so my unique needs are very different. And when people respond to those, I feel included and then I get equitable opportunity. I'm going to use a sports reference coming off of the Olympics. I'll say that our diversity is our individual physical ability. Inclusion is having the Olympics and having the Paralympics. So imagine you're running a race in the Paralympics and you have someone who's blind. You have someone who's in a wheelchair and someone who is missing a limb. They're all running the same race. And if you're not familiar with how the Olympics work, the Paralympics work, is they test your capacity to achieve the same goal. And then they build those supports in so that you're on an equal playing field. So the blind runner may have a running guide. The person who's in a wheelchair may have less physical obstacles, or they may have been pre-given those obstacles or added additional time. and then they gauge it based on their ability. That's equity in the race. They all have the opportunity to win gold, silver, or bronze, but it's not going to be given to one person over the other because they have more opportunity. It's still equal playing field. And that's what we're looking for in these spaces through equity, diversity, and inclusion work. So, what does that mean for your role and your workplace? Because now I've talked about food, I've talked about sports, but what does it look like for the legal profession? It looks like hiring and promotion. And there's a lot of hiring and promotion changes that happened this year in Ontario. We saw the shift from you now have to post, pay on postings, you have to follow up with people that you interview. So there are changes to create more equitable hiring practices. And we also include EDI policies or EDI statements in our promotion for positions, and people are doing EDI and onboarding and things like that. It's also your culture and your day-to-day behavior. It's the way that you show up for people and the way that you show them that they matter in the workplace. It is your policies and practices. Number one recommendation for policies is making sure they are people first, but also that they're tangible and able to be applied. If you have people that don't know what your policies say or they can't articulate the policy, it's likely that they just don't understand it. And so then they can't practice it if they don't understand it. And fourth, there is accountability. We miss accountability so much in all of our spaces. The expectation to hold people to that standard. How are you holding people accountable? What is the repercussive action? What is the graded response if they don't do it? How are you showing up and how are you measuring if people are showing up in your spaces? When you integrate EDI, you're doing risk management. And risk management, as lawyers, should be number one because you want to reduce that liability for yourself. And as we start to grow in understanding of what EDI looks like, we're starting to see more risk applied to workplaces. Specifically, we see in Ontario WSIB covering psychological safety, and that micro-graded psychological impact is starting to be credited as a WSIB claim. So things like that are risk management. Retention, risk management. You talk about opening yourself up to harassment claims, risk management. It's also talent strategy to bring people in, to keep them, and you're looking at culture building, which culture is innovation. You can't grow if you don't have everyone contributing. This means that you have to have those tough conversations to understand where you're at, what people need, and how you're going to grow. A couple of other terms that I want to talk to you about are harm, bias, power, privilege, cultural homophily, and psychological safety. These are big terms, but I'm going to give them to you in bite-sized day-to-day. So we're talking about harm. Harm is that impact over intention. And impact over intention is a critical conversation to have because we often think, well, I didn't mean to. That's not what I meant. But that harm is still the same. And I want to give you an example about the BAFTA awards. And there's a big public scrutiny over the response to what had happened at the BAFTA awards a couple days ago. And if you're not familiar, there with Michael B. Jordan and I'm at a loss for the other presenter, were on stage. Someone with Tourette syndrome had said the N-word out loud. And so the immediate response from the host and the follow-up response from BAFTA was that focused on Tourette syndrome, that it's not controlled, that it wasn't intentional, it wasn't harmful, and that was just where it was. But there was not a lot of awareness to the impact. Yes, there's two Black men standing on stage in front of people that the N-word was said out loud. Nothing was done. That was a pre-recorded session that was then not edited and put on television, and nothing was done. And so the harm is a lot more, and it needs to be recognized even though the intent wasn't there. This also includes exclusion, bias, and professional undermining. And so in the workplace, this could look like having a group chat, the effects of not everyone being in a group chat or having different responses in your group chat. Bias, something that is often sold as something we need to get rid of. And I'll tell you, you do not need to get rid of bias. You need to be aware of bias. When you're aware of bias, you can manage it. Bias is your patterns of judgment in your behavior. So it could be something as simple as what you like on your pizza. And when you talk about what you like on your pizza, that's preference. I like banana peppers, pineapple, and halal pepperonis because I'm in Windsor, Essex. And in Windsor, Essex, we do shredded pepperoni. And I don't like the shredded pepperoni. So I have to order the halal pepperoni so that they're round. And so I have a lot of preferences based on what I want. That's my bias. If I have a bias towards my favorite color, what music I like, if I'm a morning person or a night person, that is how we show up to understand the world. That develops from our identity. It also develops from our life experiences. Can it be wrong? Yes. Our bias can prevent us from being inclusive. Maybe you are biased against certain things that prevent people from being contributing. And I want to talk about it more on an EDI lens. Maybe you have a bias that certain people aren't capable of doing things. And so you don't give them a job task or you don't allow them autonomy to contribute. Or maybe you're biased about their education and you think that your education is better than theirs. So you are biased against what they say. For power and privilege, which is under music control and parking, so on the top left or top right and bottom left of your screen, power is your formal and informal control. And the privilege is what you gain as a result of it. So if you're a parent and you get to choose what's for dinner, the temperature, you can turn the Wi-Fi on and off, that is your power. That's your power as a parent. And the privilege is that you have those controls. So power in the workplace, it could be through your title, it could be through your control of work or workload, the hours you work, when you're working on things, but that informal piece is that reputation. Because people may know, oh, this person is like the go-to for that. Or, oh, don't do that. They'll be really angry. It's also how you control information sharing. So it could be something as simple as controlling music if you're putting Christmas music on in November, or it could be something more serious where you're controlling the information that is shared for whatever reason. The privilege there is that unearned advantage. And sometimes privilege creates a discomfort in the conversation because we see privilege as something that is shameful to have. And it's not shameful to have. Privilege is that unearned right because of your power. If you're a parent, you have to control what's for dinner because you might have a 2-year-old that's not cooking dinner for you. It's also things like if you have EV parking.
Please stand by. We're having technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Can you see me? Was it me? Was I the technical difficulty?
It's all good. Please continue.
Please give me a moment to get back to where I was. When we're talking about privilege in our spaces, it's about recognizing the opportunity that you have based on your identity. The last two here are newer into the conversation. When we talk about our relation to other people, this is sometimes a form of bias, but we have in-group, out-group bias, which is your culture homophily, and it's very much like you're relating to certain people more than others. This could be your alma mater, it could be your specific law firm, it could be what year you are. You trust people who are more like you and you treat people who are more like you with less judgment. So in your workplace, when you have clientele that may be different than you, you may judge them differently, or colleagues that are different, you may be judged differently. Social media, the last example there for psychological safety, our psychological safety is being seen, heard, and valued. And when we lack psychological safety, we are riskier, have fear, and it's more harmful to us in the workplace. So social media does this really well. It harms our psychological safety because it risks our ability to engage because we're constantly being judged and we're constantly be given that critique. So, when do EDI conversations feel risky in the workplace? Because I know a lot of you are probably thinking right now, I don't want to do this. Or maybe there's a certain person that you don't want to have this conversation with because you know that there's going to be a challenge. There's three pieces to why they feel risky: legal culture, power dynamics, and your reinforced culture. First, with legal culture, it's because legal spaces often are tied to confidence, certainty, and control because we focus on a tangible linear path forward. And so I want you to think, how do these priorities affect someone's ability to share what they think or how they feel? If someone is supposed to have control, then they feel emotionally unstable. Are they able to share that? If people are expected to be certain because you're lawyers, you're supposed to know, how do they share when they don't know? How are they allowed to ask for help? This is tied to your inclusion, your psychological safety, and your bias, because those components are affected by legal culture. Power dynamics, we are talking about who feels safe speaking, whose behaviors get challenged, and whose mistakes are forgiven. Really, here, what I want you to think about is what dynamics contribute to who is comfortable, who is uncomfortable. How do you know that they're comfortable or uncomfortable? Why is someone comfortable over another person? Because it could be because they're new, or it could be because they get talked over too many times that they stop contributing. When power dynamics are unrecognized, silence starts to creep in. And this sometimes is misunderstood as agreement, because if you're contributing and people are talking over you and you stop contributing, people will just think, oh, I must be right. No one has questions. No one is critiquing me. And this is tied to your power, privilege, cultural homophily, and your psychological safety. And the third reason of why these conversations feel risky is because we have reinforced culture. Our homogenous culture reinforces our network. It provides unequal access to sponsorship and blind spots in decision making. So we support other people. We drive people's success that are like us because they seem like us, they look like us, they feel like us, they act like us. And that singular perspective reduces our opportunity for innovation. We can't grow because we have a linear perspective. How can you problem solve if you're only looking at it from one direction? How can we problem solve if everyone thinks like us and they're scared to disagree with us? This is your bias, your power, and your privilege. So, what's the business case for integrating this into your spaces? Well, first, it's not something that's a soft skill. It's not something that you just integrate for fun. It's critical because EDI is in everything that you do. It's really a part of how you think, why you think the way you do, how you contribute to conversations, how you invite other people to contribute to conversations. And if you're not inviting other people to contribute to conversations, then you're not going to have the success or the opportunity to move forward with them. And so then they're going to leave. So, what is the harm here? And I want you to think about it as an iceberg, because what you see on the surface, someone not participating, maybe they call in sick more, maybe they don't put their hand up first. That's what you see. But there's also the deeper components that affect people's well being. Retention and well-being risks are a huge priority for a lot of organizations because you have the need to keep people, but you also want those people to be well while they're in your space. So if we're not integrating EDI conversations and we're not having these conversations, then that drives burnout. Burnout happens because people are carrying the weight of equity work in their space. If a Black employee has to be the sounding board for every issue around Black experience, they have to be the sounding board for, what do you think about that? Is this racist? Should I do this? What is your thoughts? They're carrying that on top of the load that they already have in their day-to-day work. When we don't have these conversations and we don't get that two-way feedback, we don't ask people how to support them or how to move the load, they disengage. The process for people to engage as equity seeking people, as marginalized populations, is they go from advocacy and allyship to burnout because they do the work, they invest in the work, they try, and they don't see action and they give up because it's harming them and it's harming their experience. And that creates that disengagement. They're not going to contribute, they're not going to call things out. It's just going to happen and they're going to sit by because they can't do it anymore. And there's risk for preventable turnover. Turnover costs on average, I think, up to a third of someone's salary to go from promoting or from marketing, promotion, onboarding, the time it takes for other people to carry the weight while that person is developing. It's a lot of financial investment. So you're creating that financial risk for your space because you're not having these conversations. When you have strong practices, it shows people that they matter. And so their needs are going to be met or at least addressed. And you create that psychological safety, which is understanding if people are seen, if they're heard, and if they're valued. Being seen is the diversity. I understand there's differences. Being heard is understanding what they need because there are differences. And doing the work is equity. It's being valued for your difference. We're going to help you. We're going to support you. We're going to give you what you need to succeed. Performance judgment and client risks is tied to psychological safety as well. When we leave issues unaddressed, it distorts our decision making because psychological safety ties to risky behavior, and people are more risky. They have less self-efficacy, less self-confidence because they're not feeling the worth because they're not given the worth. So their decision-making process is harmed or impeded because of it. They have an increased risk of error, and that affects your reputation as an organization. It could be simple errors as documentation differences. It could be output errors. It could be linguistic errors. The way we communicate is tied to our psychological safety. If we're not having conversations about people's, well, are you comfortable here? Do you feel safe here? How can we support you here? Then their judgment under pressure is going to affect your client outcomes. Their well-being affects the way they engage with the public and the way they engage with others, which in turn pushes back on your organization and shows that you either have a good or a bad reputation as a result of it. And third, your governance, reputation, and legal exposure is tied to that homogenous culture and bias that I was speaking about. Mishandled harm can escalate into complaints, investigation, and liability. We have precedent for this in all industries. It's starting to become recognized more. Psychological safety is become parallel to physical safety because it is an impact on the individual. And without those clear, fair processes, we're increasing our risk for exposure, which in turn affects that liability for your institution. Ultimately, when you have more earlier conversations, you're reducing that risk. It's lowering your costs because you are given the opportunity to understand what the issue is, how to fix it before it compounds and escalates and becomes a major barrier for yourself or your colleagues or your organization to move forward. So what do you do about it? Because I've told you now what we're talking about. I've told you the big problems if we don't do it. So now I want to talk about how to do it. First, you need to react, then you need to intervene, and then you need to build prevention. And it goes in this process cyclically because you're learning. You're thinking and learning about EDI, and then you're starting to apply that into your practice, and then you become an ally. This is not an overnight, let me just do everything perfectly, because you're still learning about things that are happening that you weren't aware of. So you may not be able to identify it. And as you start to learn and think about EDI, you're going to be able to identify it. Then you can take action. So first, reaction. is responding to EDI issues with openness and accountability, recognizing that intention is different than impact, and you could be doing something that is harmful, that is not necessarily intentionally malicious. How do you react when someone calls you out? Because that's an important place to start. Then you move to intervention, where you're identifying EDI issues in real time and you're stopping that harmful action. How do you apologize for the impact while still having a good intention? How do you tell someone what they're saying is inappropriate? How do you ask people in real time, what can you do to help? And then eventually you move to prevention, because as you learn, you start to shift the way that you respond. That's putting strategies in place, building skills, and you're working to reduce your EDI risk. That's something that you move through. You build those clear expectations and accountability to respond to power and privilege. You build feedback loops and communication skills to respond to psychological safety. You build in low stakes and regular correction for opposing cultural homogeny. When you want to incorporate other perspectives, you have to correct linear perspective. And lastly, your education and awareness works to alleviate your bias. So what do you do? What are you doing when you're doing this, and what are your big barriers? Your big barriers are yourself. A lot of times we fear engaging in this. And once you get past that fear, then you need to start looking at your organizational structure and how you're supporting EDI conversations. People don't stay silent because they want to, they stay silent because they have to. That's their fight or flight response. And we want to make sure we're creating spaces for people to speak up and speak out. So first is a fear to report. This is why people aren't calling things out. There's a fear to report, which is where those feedback loops and communication come in. How are you encouraging people to have a conversation with you about this? Where are you seeing retaliation or reputational harm? Are people scared? And when I talk about retaliation, a lot of people will say, retaliation won't happen here. It's not always explicit, and it's not always actual. You may say there's no retaliation. They may perceive risk of retaliation. And the perceived risk is just as critical here as a barrier as actual risk, because perceived risk is preventing people from speaking out. It's also tied to labeling, being labeled as being difficult or not being a fit for the organization, or they're not an ideal client. People fear the outcome of their contribution. To the right there is ambiguity. When we talk about clear expectations and accountability, this is a big piece. People aren't really sure. Is this serious enough to report? Am I overreacting? What are they going to do? Can they do anything? And you have to create that clarity to encourage people to contribute. What are the pathways? What is serious to report? Give me an example. Show them what that process looks like. Give people the transparency that they need to report, because you know they have a fear. Team and culture dynamics addresses your low stakes and regular correction, looking at the relationship between junior and senior colleagues and equity versus non-equity roles, people who have different levels of power dynamics. How are you creating a mentorship and sponsorship program? And sponsorship in the idea that you're encouraging people to move up, you're promoting them, you're talking about them, you're encouraging them. Mentorship and sponsorship go hand in hand. And there you also have skills development, which is your education and awareness, knowing how to name harm without escalating. If you haven't taken de-escalation training, I would highly encourage you to take de-escalation training, because you can have a tough conversation, but if you don't know when to take a step back and be 1.5 meters away from someone, or don't know to put your back to the door and them feel like they're closed off in a room, or not to take out a pen and paper to write notes down to show them that you're actually listening. All of those pieces of de-escalation training tie to understanding that people who are psychologically unsafe need those additional pieces to be recognized, and show them that you're interested in hearing about the harm without escalating the situation emotionally or physically. And that allows that environment to grow with you and move forward. And I think that is your critical piece. So, how do you address EDI harm without blame or collapse in your space? Where do you start? Focus on your behavior and the impact, not the character. A lot of times when we respond to people, we say, you did this, you said that, you are hurting them, or you were mean, or you don't understand. It's them doing it, but it's the action and behavior you want to focus on that separates it. When we talk about any sort of politically tied conversation, if we talk about that person as being embodying that identity, they shut down, they put their walls up, they don't want to engage. So we need to focus on the behavior, where it came from, versus them as an individual being the problem. You also need to separate intent from impact, because you don't want to discredit their intentions and make them the problem. You need to show them the impact while recognizing that their intention could be good. And that builds accountability, because then now they can reflect and do better. And you're not punishing them as an individual for the problem. We need to document patterns and not just incidents, so that you can understand where your organization needs education or support. You need to be curious before drawing conclusions. A lot of times we bring our own bias into EDI conversations because we think the conversation has to go a certain way, or we hear something and we automatically respond. How are you being curious? Why do you think that? Why is this happening? What are the other components? Where do you want this to go? Being curious allows other people to take ownership in the process as well, which builds their autonomy and their responsibility for that growth forward. It builds their psychological safety. You need to match your response to severity and pattern, which means that if you don't have a policy in place that requires that escalating response, or you don't have a policy in place that has any sort of escalated repercussion, then you're not going to be matching it effectively, and it becomes very subjective. So it could differ from manager to manager. It could differ from person to person, situation to situation, how you're feeling that day. So you need a little bit of consistency there. And lastly, involving supports early. HR, mentors, practice leaders, having people involved and not trying to do it all yourself, because collectively we can work towards that success if you're having open and honest conversations, because I wouldn't expect you to be an expert in these spaces. And so incorporating that learning and being open to saying, I need to go read about that. I need to go understand this more. Let's circle back and have this conversation. When you're looking at improving your EDI in practice, you can start with these 4 pieces. First, with your communication. Encouraging and developing clear, direct, and respectful feedback. How are you asking for feedback? The same way you're giving feedback. I always like to tell people, if you're not getting feedback, even though you have an open door policy, it's likely that people don't trust you. They don't trust to give you that feedback. Name the impact without accusation and focus on the action and not the individual. That's your communication piece. You're really ensuring that you're providing that information and receiving that information back, because you want to show people they matter. In your decision making, check your bias and really understand how you know if you're biased or not. Do the work for yourself while encouraging other people to do it. Asking who's benefiting from this, who's bearing the risk, who's bearing the unseen load, the burden, and creating those intentional opportunities for inclusion, supporting people to be involved in the process. For coaching and advising, you're looking at developing others' capacity. You also have to model that behavior, because if you're not modeling the behavior, then you can't expect other people to do it. You need to model accountable leadership, which means you need to be accountable, hold yourself accountable, and allow other people to hold you accountable. Because we are not just doing this for performative action. We want to do this together. And that mentorship and sponsorship I talked about is really, you're interrupting that cultural homogeny. You're interrupting that linear perspective. You're encouraging different perspectives to move forward and be involved in those conversations, broadening access to support, giving people more opportunities, and ensuring people have that trajectory of growth alongside you in your spaces. When we talk about this today, really what I'd like you to take from our conversation is that this is really about skills over comfort. I don't want you to think that this is an easy task because it's not an easy task. It's a very difficult task and it's time consuming. You, as an individual, have to do reflective work. You, as an organization, have to do auditing work to understand where you're at and where you're going. And it's not easy because you're looking for faults, you're looking for areas of growth, and you may not want to prioritize finding your downfalls. But that's where we need to do this work, because we have to have conversations about what our faults are or where we can improve to make sure we're building those better outcomes, not just for ourselves, for the people we're having conversations with, the people we're trying to bring in, and ultimately our overall reputation. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to learn with you. I'm very appreciative of Nick for bringing this outward to all of you and the opportunity to have these conversations. I believe we're going to open up the Q&A and have a little bit of a conversation. But if you would like to connect with me, you're more than welcome to, and ask for support afterwards. So thank you so much. I will pass it back to the team.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abela. That was a great presentation. Definitely some very useful insights and some things that I learned. I really liked how you mentioned that just because there's silence doesn't mean there's no issue. So I think it's really important to kind of build that culture for people to speak up and to feel inclusive, and for the team, for the law firm to really thrive and to be able to attract talent. So lots of useful insights there. Yeah, so we'll head to the Q&A. So if you can think of your questions, then please put them in the chat function, in the Q&A function in Zoom. But I will do, while you're thinking of your questions, I'll share my screen to do a little outro. So just one second. So thank you again for attending. It was great to have you. My name again is Nick Tenev from Cowen Litigation. And if you have any questions for my law firm, any litigation type questions or questions about this webinar or future webinars, feel free to reach out at info@cowenlitigation.com, or you can call us. Our phone number is there. And also, if you have any litigation matters you need assistance with, we can help. We offer a referral program and a 15% referral fee for litigation matters that you refer to us. And we have a great team here. We're very experienced, practical, efficient, and solutions-oriented, and also very accessible. That's a common complaint people have of their lawyers and litigation lawyers, is that they can't reach them. They're not hearing back, but we're very accessible, and we strive to get things done, be accessible, and achieve great results for clients in a very cost-effective way. So what is next? You can sign up to our newsletter for future CPDs regarding professionalism and EDI. These are free CPDs, so it's an easy way to get your hours, your professionalism and EDI hours done for the year. And if you have not subscribed yet, you can email us at info@cowenlitigation.com, and we will add you to our email list so you know when the next one is coming up. And also, there will be a survey at the end regarding your thoughts on this webinar. It's just a few questions. I think it's 5 or 6 questions. It would really help us to understand how we can make it better and what you enjoyed. And 2 people chosen at random will get a $20 Starbucks gift card each. So please fill out that survey in the next 24 hours, and we'll choose 2 people at random to get your prizes. And the next professionalism webinar will be in April. The date and topic will be announced at a later time. So that was it for my outro. I'll stop sharing my screen here, and we'll look at the Q&A. So let me just pull that up. Okay, so a few questions here. So Dr. Abela, how would you address inappropriate comments or behavior from a senior partner without jeopardizing one's career progression? So what do you do in those situations when you want to speak up, but it might be taken the wrong way? You don't want to ruffle feathers. What advice do you have?
I think that the biggest challenge when speaking to a senior partner or anyone is considered senior to you in a power dynamic is there's timing and strategy. And you have to be calculated while having an authentic conversation with people. And being calculated in communication is not a problem as long as you're doing it with intention. So, first, when you're talking about timing, it's really important to understand that we can't call things out in real time all the time because you're often with inappropriate comments in a space where that person feels comfortable and confident enough to say what they said in that space. So they may not be aware that what they're saying is inappropriate if they're willing to say it. And if they do know it's inappropriate, they believe that they have a group aligned with them. So calling it out in that moment is likely to put you in a negative or more harmful or risky position. So, first, finding a space that allows that private and respectful conversation to happen so that you maintain that professional relationship. And then also the strategy behind it. What do you want to get out of it? Are you wanting them to apologize? Are you wanting them to grow and change? What's the impact that you're trying to alleviate? This could be a learning opportunity. Are you the person to do that learning for them or with them? Or do you have other support channels, whether it's formal or informal, to help you have that conversation? Ultimately, you do have the expectation to have safe reporting pathways within your organization, and that shouldn't penalize the people that are bringing up concern. But without those, you have to either create a culture to have informal conversations. And so, really, back to the two pieces: timing, knowing when to do it, where to do it, which is de-escalation training, and then having that strategy to ensure you're getting the outcome that you desire.
Thank you for that. So you would meet with that person one-on-one. This would be kind of a private conversation. Okay.
And you also have to consider the person that's impacted or the people that are impacted. Depending on what the comment is, we also have to talk about the impact, even though maybe if someone's saying something that's inappropriate, they may not know the impact or they may not have a bad intention about saying it. But you also have to address that person. So going back to that BAFTA's example is that they addressed it right then and there, saying the person has Tourette syndrome. It is what it is. Be respectful of their disability. But there was no turn to the people who were impacted to say, hey, we recognize this is harmful. What can we do for you? So it is a two-piece management strategy.
Okay, good. Great advice. Okay, another question we have here is, how can you be calculated as a neurodivergent person?
It's as a neurodivergent person, I think we are just calculated by nature. So how can you be calculated as a neurodivergent person? I think the question, I'm curious about this question because there's so many neurodivergence pieces of neurodivergence. You could be on the autism spectrum. You could be someone who's having dyslexia, dyscalculia, whatever. There's so much here. As a neurodivergent person, if your challenge is the planning piece, integrate the pieces for planning. And if your challenge is the social piece, then find the alternative for that social engagement. It's likely that as a neurodivergent person, you're already working to manage the areas that may not be quote unquote norms for your practice. So the same management strategies can be integrated for calculating the way that we communicate in difficult conversations as well.
Yeah.
If whoever contributed that would like to
Yeah,
add
you're welcome
another
to.
tell me the neurodivergent piece, like the specific. I'm very curious.
You're welcome to add more information. Okay, I think it's them. They said are the safe? I don't think it addresses your question there, but I think it's the same person. Where it says anonymous attendee, so I'm not sure if it's the same one or a different
I
one.
think it's a different person.
Oh, okay, okay. But that was a great comment, and I was just wondering, do you provide consulting or training like that? Like, what if somebody at a law firm didn't know how to deal with a certain situation? Can they reach out to you or someone like you to get advice, especially if they do have neurodivergence or some kind of personal situation that needs more help in these situations?
Yeah, when we talk about neurodiversity, there's a lot of ways that people have to address it. So it's either in your learning and training in your workplace. And so, yes, on that end, if you're talking about your clientele, yes, but there's also almost every neurodiversity has an organization, a nonprofit that does this work. And so finding a focused organization, incredible. But yeah, when you really, it's about looking at how you can support people. Any neurodiversity, you want to understand what they need.
Okay, that's great advice. Okay, another question we have is Dr. Abela, in situations where concerns about xenophobia or racial bias are brought to a company owner and the owner does not recognize or accept that there's an issue, what would be the appropriate next step from an EDI perspective? Thank you.
Yeah, xenophobia and racial bias huge, especially in the GTA right now. I'm actually in Windsor, so we're just starting to see that big wave of demographic transition, and so it's just starting to pop up here. Simple as this is, it's likely the person who's it's being brought up to doesn't experience it. And they might have the perspective of color blindness, like, I don't see color, so I don't treat anyone different. And so it needs to be brought from a different lens, quantifying the racial bias or the xenophobia. Where is it showing up? Find those tangible examples, because when it is a subjective, intangible, oh, someone feels bad or someone feels like they're not included, it's really hard to get people to buy in if they don't experience it themselves. And sometimes you have to do the alt business case, then build humanity after. Business first helps build the buy-in for humanity.
Makes sense. Another question we have is, are the safe pathways, and they put in quotation marks, so maybe it's that's from your presentation, for reporting you mentioned the same as whistleblowing.
No.
Okay.
Whistleblowing should be your very last resort. If someone's resorting to whistleblowing, that is your big red flag, that you don't have informal communication pathways, that the culture isn't safe, there's no trust. People can't have informal conversations and informally request support, because to whistleblow, it means that they literally have exhausted their opportunities. So for safe pathways, yes, there's anonymous reporting, there's different forms of feedback. I mean, I'm not saying to put like a little Dropbox on your door, but finding ways that don't whistleblowing should be your last resort, because you want to work to create a space first.
Okay. Next question. What is the best way to communicate with toxic personalities? I think everyone wants to know that.
I wish I had a great recipe.
Yeah,
Um, I would be interested in their definition of toxic personality,
yeah.
but a lot of this is what happens in toxic workplaces. People who are in poorly structured organizations lead to nitpicking each other. So there's policy that doesn't align, practices are inconsistent, there's no transparency, and then that leaves people to their own devices and they start thinking about what's happening and they start making up the narrative in their for themselves. That's what creates the toxic environment, because it goes, if we throw back to high school, things are happening to us, not with us. And when they happen to us, we become toxic and we start to attack other people. As simple as, I'm working with an organization right now where they have this happening and they're nitpicking the dress code on each other because for years it's been inconsistently applied. There's no process to accountability. There's no discipline. They're union, non-union mix. There's so many inconsistencies that now they're being toxic amongst each other. And so the best way to deal with way to communicate with toxic personalities, look for the root cause of the toxicity, manage that, and you'll start to see it ripple back out.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It could be so many things. So I think looking for that root cause is really important. Okay, next question. Um, First of all, they're saying thanks for the valuable info presented today. It was a pleasure attending. And now the question is, my question is related to acknowledgement of harm, like in the BAFTA situation. Maybe admitting that the behavior is harmful may entail, in the organization's mind, legal liability. What do you recommend in that situation? Essentially, it's like, hey, there might be an issue here, guys, but if we admit it and start addressing it, we're kind of, we might attract legal liability. So
Look,
handle that.
I'm not a lawyer, so let me just clarify
It's a good
that.
point.
when
Uh,
when I when we talk about legal liability, I think that I see this all over. I'm going to use a local example. Is there's there was a company, it was like the Windsor Spitfires had someone create a fake account and a fake email account, and they were emailing small businesses and saying, if you send us $500, we'll hold your spot as a vendor for the next year. When the Spitfires came out and addressed the issue, they didn't do any sort of social fix. They just said, "Oh, it wasn't us." Like leave it alone. There's a difference between legal liability and your social investment, and the intention versus impact conversation is social investment. How are you can show up for people, showing them that they matter and that you value them, understand that you can acknowledge harm without agreeing to their harm. And there's a legal side to that and there's a social side.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, run it by your organization's legal counsel to be safe if you think there might be some legal implications. Okay, that's great advice. Do you have time for one or two more questions?
Yeah, I want to recognize the anonymous one that said, I've often been told that I'm super blunt by a former employee. I also tend to be unable to wait to address the situations and want to talk about it immediately. And the reason that, and I think that might be our extension from the neurodiversity question, because then they said, hence the question about being calculated. Yes, I also tend to word vomit in a lot of places, and I'm also blunt. I have found that when you talk about cognitive behavior therapy, which is the psychological transition for yourself, you understand what triggers you, what your behavioral response is, what your physical response is, how it affects your emotions, and what you can do about it. So, my personal recommendation to you would be to look at that CBT process for yourself and how you can mitigate the triggers and the response to those triggers.
Okay, that's great advice. Okay, another question is, how do we focus on impact without the other person feeling blamed or becoming defensive? So I guess that's in those situations where maybe you speak up, but person becomes defensive, and it becomes more about you and them versus kind of the underlying root cause or the impact you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. You have to anchor the conversation in observable behavior. A lot of times we like to add our own opinion, and we need to talk about the effects on the workplace, the effect on people, and the effect on your clients. Because when you separate that intention from the impact, it goes, I know that this may not have been your intention, but the impact was this on client, this on person, this on workplace. When you do that through that non-hostile tone and you invite their perspective in to understand them, you give them that skin in the game in the conversation, and you're moving the goal from blaming them to maintaining professional standards or building strong working relationships, and they're a part of the solution instead of just being the problem.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I like how you said it. They become part of the solution, so they feel
Mhm.
like they're having a positive impact now, not a negative impact. Last question. What are some practical ways leaders can normalize these conversations in our firm culture?
The first thing they need to do is model the behavior. A lot of times we expect other people to do things without doing it ourselves. I saw this video of a mom who is bringing her toddler into the store to give people compliments. And she said, we also have to do it. So then the mom was giving compliments and then the kid was giving compliments. If we're not modeling the behavior, addressing issues early and consistently and setting those expectations for ourselves, then we can't expect it from other people. So normalizing it is starting to do it, building it into everything you're doing, whether it's short stand-up meetings to your formal feedback through email and communications, and also having those discussions about the performance, how people are supported, what rewards they need, and not just doing it for billable results, but because I know billable's big, but it also has to be those social results which result in long term in billable results.
So maybe I'm thinking maybe if there's like a performance review with an associate, maybe one of the questions can be how can we be more inclusive? So you kind of give them that opportunity to, give you advice on how to improve the firm culture. Is how would you kind of implement that?
Stop doing hindsight performance reviews. Everyone does hindsight.
Yeah,
We always just say, okay, well, over the last 6 months, you were trash. And it's like,
yeah.
how do you do it in smaller increment? It doesn't have to be always formal.
Hmm.
And giving people the opportunity, hey, you missed that deadline last week. What were some factors that contributed to it? Was there something that we could change so that we can support you next time? Did you need a framework? Did you know how to do this? Was what gave you the most delay? Look for the bottlenecks that are causing the problems so that you can solve those instead of always blaming the person afterwards.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think it's important to make those conversations two-way. How can we do things different? How can we
Mm-hmm.
improve the firm? Okay, that's great advice. I really, really enjoyed that. There were some really, really great takeaways there. But that brings us to the end of this webinar. And thanks again for everybody attending. Of course, thank you, Dr. Janelle Abela. And that's it for this time, guys. We'll see you at the next webinar. And bye for now.